life with like fully fully understood the poem, or is there a no?
You don't know, I know there's you, but you, at least when things start to come together, if you look at something and say, my goodness, this poem is one of the 300 Tong poems. It's taught to every school child, you know, not every school child, but eventually you'd probably read the 300 Tong poems. What's so good about it? Right? And then you try to realize why it mattered. And you start and you find out new things. Every once in a while I come back to these poems, I learn new things about it that I didn't know. So reading as in English is not I've got it, that's it. I can now dispose of the poem because I understand it. It's a constant return.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like,
Yeah.
I think in your previous conversation with Professor Bo, you mentioned poetry creates a moment. And then I really see it in this poem. Like, you felt once you are really worried or anxious and you read this poem, you felt it provides a shelter for you.
It provides an imaginary space, yeah. And if there's a moment, it's the moment of the end. But then, of course, the end only matters because you've been through what went before.
Yeah.
So like water, you know, it starts up what water doesn't do, which is going uphill, but it eventually comes to stillness.
Later on, in one way, especially in this song, right, it was celebrated as sort of the ultimate literati, because he also painted, for poetry, they sort of romanticize his life, and I don't know, it's, you know, reading this poem, this is, you know, this is a person, you know, this is a person one way that we can get some sense from.
I think, you know, you do get something of that, but remember that we're reading, all the questions about literati and everything all come through the later reading of Wang Wei and the way the world had changed. So that when they anthologized Wang Wei, they never anthologized the court poems, hardly ever, maybe one or two, which he was a master, right? Most of his poems were lost in the Anlushan rebellion, so his brother gathered together, who was chief minister, gathered together what he could find.
How can you tell a good poem from a bad poem?
Ah, that's an interesting question. Sometimes there are poems that other people haven't noticed that you realize are major poems. That happens. And sometimes there are poems that are supposed to be major poems, and I just can't see it. So you develop your own, form of judgment, I think. And it has to be an educated judgment. We don't have to. You should enjoy the poems you enjoy and not enjoy the ones you don't enjoy. But you try to hone that judgment. Again, one of the things that provokes you is what has survived in the canon. And also, and sometimes I think what's been excluded by the canon, what was upsetting. So when I did my dissertation, I wrote on the poet Meng Jiao, who was an extremely ugly poet. And you don't find many ugly poets really writing about awful things in China. But I also found out that he was incredibly popular in the Tang. But in the Song, they didn't like him anymore. And one critic commented, "he makes people unhappy." So you suddenly realize that in the Tang, making your poetry wasn't supposed to make you happy. But the Song wanted poetry to make you calm, and, teach you to behave yourself, and be cheerful, make the best of things. So that it's not just the poems that have been survived and cannot, but also the things that have been lost in the history of Chinese, the development of Chinese civilization.
And what did you think Wang Wei did for readers? What did he convey your sense?
Wang Wei is not a calm poet. The last line of this poem is pure Wang Wei. As Wang Wei achieves stillness and simplicity with great effort. And so there's an energy in Wang Wei, which is missing in all the people who wrote on the surface very similar poems. And you read those poems and you find they're boring. And you read Wang Wei, for some reason, this is very interesting. And it's that sort of act of repression.
It almost feels intentional, but almost effortlessly, though.
Effortlessly. That's,
In
yeah.
its simplicity.
Yeah, it's simplicity. But I think when I wrote a book on high tongue poetry, I entitled the chapter Wang Wei, The Artifice of Simplicity. Because it's a simplicity that's hard won. It's simplicity that rejects, that refuses to do certain things, right? And for someone who was from the highest echelons of society, with the best education, you know, so that there's this basic negative aspect of Wang Wei.
Almost make it more like authentic.
Yeah, it makes it more authentic. Because it's very easy if you turn out a very bland poem, you know, and say, this is the way of Chad. But that doesn't work as poetry. It's winning that.